Start on page 26.
Math, 6 through 12, September 23rd, p.m.
Hey, Brad, what do you want to talk about? Page number, please.
Page 26. Page 26. Okay. I think that the concept right there for under numerical computation, I think that's a good guideline for us to have. That the idea is that as we teach, it isn't so much a matter of, I don't want kids just dependent upon calculators, not back. So I think that's essentially, I agree with that statement that they have. I just want to get an idea whether everybody else agrees with that. Kids need to learn how to do these things. Only later on will we actually introduce actual calculator.
Conceptual understanding.
Okay. The next one that I have,
Page 26.
still page 26. Okay. At there, I was wondering on number 2. This was a question. They have a sum, difference, product, and quotient of complex numbers. Did a mathematician do this?
Yes.
So there's a complex numbers in the mathematician sense, so that it contains both rational and irrational numbers.
We're talking about number 1.
Complex in terms of,
We're talking about
real number
square
plus
root
a multiple of I.
Multiples of I.
Yes.
Okay, but I'm surprised that that's right up there at number 2, because I just would not have,
I don't think these are in any order of
Yeah, I don't think
preference.
they are either.
I think they're just a random list and not necessarily.
Okay,
That is
a
something
hierarchy.
that's done in algebra too.
yes, that's what I was surprised it was number 2 in the list of.
Yeah, I don't think there's.
I don't think it's a hierarchy at all. And when you brought number 2 up, and I guess while I taught it, I'm not so sure that all those components are critical components of kids, of all students.
Yes.
You know, why I may have taught it in number 2, but to say that that's a critical component of all kids, and to understand what a complex number is,
Yes.
I'm fine with that. Simple, not to rewrite a complex number, you don't have to add, subtract. When you get into the division of complex numbers, you know that. I think
Yes,
that's probably.
that's why I was really surprised that was number 2. I would prefer to do things sort of, what are the basics and go to the more extreme.
Well, if we were gonna, let's organize, but I don't think we're gonna, are we gonna reorder this list? Are we just gonna talk about what's here?
Okay.
And then I think we can talk
Yeah,
about.
When we make our presentation on that, I would like it to be in the order of the most basic to the more complex.
And I think we can do that by different groups of things, but sometimes you have a really basic order of operations, and then you might have a really basic algebra. And so to say that one is more important than another, I don't know. That, we can talk about, because sometimes you have something, a big thing tied within the standard, so, and we can talk about that later. But I think this was just reviewing what this document says, do we have any issues with what was said here?
Again, I think this document was a
check.
list, well, it's a list of the things they want their students to be able to do. I don't think there's a real order to this. But, I want us to make sure we don't skip page 25. Because to me, 25 is really important in terms of.
Should we maybe start with that page?
Well, I just want to point out, the very first thing they said, that mastery of mathematics includes is thinking conceptually, not procedurally about math. And that was my problem when I was in this group,
Yes.
because I felt like that was a great first statement to make.
And then we're all,
And then they went through all these procedures they want students to be able to do.
yes.
Okay, I understand there are procedures, but it doesn't seem like their list.
Yes.
And that's where I hope what we come up with is more like documents that put that conceptual understanding as part of the standards itself. I don't want it, that's why I keep using the word checklist. That's a derogatory statement. I don't like a checklist list of procedures.
Right.
Because teachers then look at it, and students look at it, and people who write assessment look at it and say, check. And that's not, it's about thinking conceptually.
I think that's important. Only thing I want to make certain is that they have to know how to do the procedure as well.
Sure.
I mean, because the problem I have, some kids coming in to advanced grades from other locations have not memorized their times tables or things that are very basic.
And I'm gonna say, Fred, that that's been since the first year I started teaching. My first year teaching high school math was teaching multiplication class to incoming ninth graders.
But the procedures are the equal to of the greater than or equal to. I mean, we want our students to know more than the procedure. It's not we want them to know the procedure.
That's right, that's right.
Because there's 30 years of research using national data that shows that our students, even the ones who can do the computation, don't have a clue what they're doing or when to use it.
Right.
And so that's the conceptual part.
And they get so wrapped up in a given procedure,
Right.
which adds complexity to it, because that's the way they know how to do it, and what that procedure is changes.
And they
depending
can't
upon the
transfer that
teachers,
information.
and they don't transfer information.
And
So
so I was,
your concept is important, but they have to have the absolute basics first, then the concept, and then.
well, my argument is the concept. I think you have to learn, now I'm going down to the elementary level, but I think you have to learn what it means to add before you memorize facts about adding. It does no good to memorize a multiplication table. It does no good to memorize a multiplication table if you don't know what multiplication is. And so it's the same way here, in that, I want students, there's really nothing on this list that I would say should be on this list, really. But I would argue that this is the minimum, and it's not really where you start. I don't want teachers, today we're gonna teach you this skill, tomorrow we're gonna teach you this skill. It has to be conceptual development.
And which goes back to what you're talking about, Fred, is kids have been taught to memorize facts, and they have memorized them, and then they forget them. And so if they understand the concept, if they really understand conceptually what multiplication is, then they have a procedure. It's kind of like the first year I taught calculus. All the kids came into me knowing all the trig formulas, saying that they got A's and trig, because they had memorized all the formulas. They had memorized them, and then I had to make sure calculus, they didn't know a single one of them. So I taught more of a conceptual approach about understanding and knowing the few and how they relate, so they can derive anything that they need to have at any time that they need to have. Because just memorizing facts
Right.
is one of the most pivotal things that have to be tied to something.
That's right.
That's exactly the same thing I learned when I started teaching calculus in 2005. Because before I started teaching calculus, I really didn't think a lot about conceptual understanding. But because in that course we used a lot of data and equations and the graph of the equations, looking at the different things from those different perspectives again.
Right.
And then, so I mean, I became a better teacher for algebra, I think, I hope, when I started teaching calculus, you know. But at the same time, I did a better job at algebra 2 because I had taught algebra 1 and geometry prior to that. And so.
In those instances, you've got something you're building upon.
Right.
The concept, so it's one concept coming from another, and that's the advantage of being able to derive something, whether it's a geometric proof or whatever.
Well, but they do that, you can do that in elementary level too, it's not as formalized.
And I just want to make this point here, that the way standards are written does affect the way that conceptual stuff is viewed by teachers, by students, by assessors. Because, that's really what happened when the GLEs came around. The GLEs were not meant to be a set of standards to teach by, they were meant to be for assessment.
They were.
But every school, every teacher took them and said, oh, check. That's not what they were meant to be. And so that's kind of where we moved. We tried to get away from that. The Common Core's tried to get away from that. I hope we make that move too.
I was gonna, just to help me understand, if you look at Bosch, or anyone, I guess, if you look at the Common Core standards, and it's someone's opinion, what would be a good standard here that, that's written for conceptual understanding? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Are you talking about what page or grade or?
I guess looking at page 6, if you could find,
I'm just looking at the first one.
not page 6, grade 6.
Yeah, grade 6, the very first one says, understand the concept of ratio, use racial language to describe the ratio relationship between two quantities. That's not an algorithmic do thing. Can you understand the language of ratio and what the words mean, use it in a sentence? That's the beginning of conceptual.
Well, I think it's both.
So, in your,
Let's go back.
I just, but she's trying to explain, and I'll help me understand what.
As opposed to, let's see, I just,
So in your-
divide polynomials.
Yes.
That's not written. I'm not saying they shouldn't be able to divide polynomials, but I'm saying that tells me nothing about the conceptual development of that.
So in your opinion, is that understand the concept of a ratio, use ratio language, is that written in a way that you feel is appropriate then?
Yeah, but I think, and not everything can be written that way, but I do
Right.
think we have to write things in a way that develops the concept and give direction of how to do that, yes.
So I don't think that's written appropriately because, well, I don't see very many examples of that provided, so it's very hard to define what they're saying about when they use the phrase use ratio language to describe, it would be I don't understand. There's a lot of ratio language.
Well, there's an example, there's an example right after.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think that's much more, okay, maybe it needs more. I won't disagree.
Okay, so if you mean like ratio language like.
Ratio weeks to birds to geese in the birdhouse to the zoo was 2 to 1. That's ratio language.
Yeah.
I would like more
Yeah, maybe-
clarification
Yeah,
and definition.
Exactly, definition.
But my point is, it's more than divide polynomials.
Okay.
See,
It doesn't just say write a
Well,
ratio.
see, but the problem with that, I don't agree, Bob, because divide polynomials, a ratio, when you're talking about, that's the two ends of the spectrum there that we're discussing, at the 6th grade level, what language would better define, ratio language, in your opinion?
And we don't have to get caught up on that right now, I just was trying to have a better understanding of the conversation.
Well, I mean, I think-
Really clear for a 6th grade curriculum, that's extremely clear. That's one of the clearest ones you could have chosen.
Yes. I think it's a poor example, is what I'm saying, that, it would help me if I saw other examples.
Can we, because with part of it, can we get back to looking at, and I understand what you're saying, but I think this part of the conversation was to really look at looking at a higher ed document and talking about that, but I understand, and I think that's something we definitely.
and my point was just to say that I don't disagree with the things on this list.
Right.
I just don't want this to be the list. I don't want it to be the standard. I don't think it's
Yes,
a
if
good.
everybody agrees, then let's start through them then and say how would you modify them in order to make it into to answer your question as well. How are these then modified in order to give the conceptual content?
Can we, I'm not sure that's really what our task was when we went here to review. My understanding was I went through the review to look at, see what I liked, what I didn't like, what I agreed with, what I disagreed with, as a competency possibility for entry. And then is this a list that we agree with, and then I agree that we take back and maybe look at writing standards, and maybe I'm wrong. Yeah, so, because then we have to think about, and how's one, we're talking also then about development. When is this done? Is this done in 6th grade, 7th grade?
You've already made that point, Fran, and that is that this is not written from a developmental standpoint. The second one is complex numbers. So this isn't the basis we should use. I don't think, I'm trying to be strong there and say, this is not what we should use to write our standards. It's not developed conceptually. It's just a list of things.
But can we agree though, that when we look through here, that we agree these are important items, or not important items? I think we can do that.
Yeah.
And then we can say, okay, when we write and have our standards together, we can go back and say, did we make sure that we included these things that were within the context of the standards we wrote?
In addition to that, we're just talking about the contents of this list, not as if it is an ordered list.
Correct. It's not a hierarchy list that one comes with it. This is definitely not an ordered list.
Okay, and then, well, then how about if we talk about what we think should also be added to this particular list?
Or maybe some things that we think are not necessarily important, like what we talked about is complex numbers. Really that critical, the division of complex numbers for all students as an exit level competency. We agree that our kids going into engineering majors, that, yeah, it is. But is that something that all students across the state do? That's where you need to kick in from the current tech, is that a critical skill for kids to graduate from high school? Not that it's not important for those kids going into science and engineering career, it is.
Well,
And it might be helpful to make sure that we all here have an understanding of what we're talking about, of that content of complex numbers, for example. How it relates to vectors, you know, the components of the complex number, things that are identified and, you know, introduced in Algebra 2, you know, to be developed at a later date, depending on the student's choice path.
Right, and I would definitely agree when you're looking at this, because calculating the sum, because of products and complex numbers is something that I think all eligible kids would think it's not that difficult to do. The division of it is the one that I take issue with.
Otherwise, it's just polynomials.
Yeah, add, subtract, multiply.
No, she's talking about division of
Right,
complex.
right, that's the only one that's not just the same as we do with any other.
Right, so the division of complex numbers, I don't think is, I think it's important for those kids who are going on to an engineering science degree. I'm not so sure it's important for all kids. That's what I would say.
But I believe complex numbers do come up in Power 4.
They're all stars.
Because it's algebra 2, it's.
It's a star or plus.
Oh, I'm
plus
sorry,
standard.
plus
The plus
nine.
standard means that it's for those college and career
Right.
issues. The only thing I would say when we're looking at the standards on this page 2, I'm not sure, and of course this is procedural, but it says on standard web, following the correct order of procedures of operation, why that would be stated, I don't know.
Which one is that?
On page 26 and 1, it says apply method of operation to fill out any form and following the correct order of operations. We're not understanding, that doesn't need to be said.
Well, is there?
Just finding the order of operations.
Yeah.
Or find method of operations are real numbers in any form, so I need to say. But we're not writing this as standard, so.
Right, number 4 is one I find rather strange to be in here. Because compare order and order real numbers, including final or approximations on the number line. I mean, that's in grade school.
Actually,
Early grade school. Why I heard
Except you got irrational numbers. That's the difference.
You know,
It doesn't happen.
on a number line.
not irrational.
Would you like the students to know where square root 3 is on number line approximately? Irrational is what I
Oh,
said.
irrational.
Yeah.
That's not elementary.
And so right now, that's what's being taught in 3 and 4.
But, no, not necessarily the number line. I mean, the square root of 2 is a specific number.
Right, but
Yes.
want to.
Don't you want to know about what that is?
Conceptually, don't you want them to see about what that is?
Well, that's been a topic of discussion on a few discussion groups that I participate in online, and, you know, the understanding that the square root of 2 can be approximated is a good general idea. The problem is, what I've seen online, everybody, I don't know if you've seen the same thing, but I've seen things where it was placed, you know, just in the middle of 1 and 2. Well, yeah, and you know, that's kind of what we're doing here in this whole process, is that we're trying to understand the problem. And understanding that it's between 1 and 2, for, you know, I don't know, whatever grade, 2nd grade or 3rd grade, no, you know, I'm not elementary. Let me finish, let me finish, okay? Because I don't have that perspective there. But what I'm saying is you can never locate that value on a number line, and that's what Fred's trying to point out, I guess, is that, you know, you can talk about approximation techniques that are used to locate numbers, which in calculus, you know, we would probably approximate that, you know, using, yeah. I mean, there's different methods that you can use to locate that, or, you know, try to narrow your focus to that number, but you cannot what's the word? You cannot exactly grab it, and that's, you know, so some mathematicians have problems with that idea.
But don't you want, I mean, go ahead, let's see your hand.
I see what you're saying, and I think that that's why language is important, that we say, like, we'll say approximate the location for number line. But I think we really need to take into account throughout our proceedings too, the conceptual abilities of our students at that time. A second grader has no clue what the square root of 2 is. He doesn't even know the square root of 2 exists. And, you know, we have to make sure that when we write these standards, that we are making them to where the kids at that age level can cognitively understand and conceptually understand what's going on. So we really have to keep our kids, I think, in the forefront. The only other thing that I would add to that is, as far as how much in depth to go, it kind of goes along with it. When you first teach a child to count, you don't start with the negative numbers, and you don't start with fractions, because they don't understand that. You know, you start with the natural numbers and the whole numbers. And then as they get older and as their brains develop, then we add those other things in. If you don't have to say, well, since I didn't teach them negative numbers, but those negative numbers are there, we teach them that they can understand it. So we have to make sure that when we put this in, it's time that they can, and yeah, we may be leaving out some of that really specific information that they're not ready for yet, and there's where the hierarchy comes, and then you guys can expand upon the background knowledge there.
Two things I want to point out. Number one, all complex things are not plus standards standards. They are not.
Yeah, that has an introduction. Yeah.
Perform arithmetic operations with complex numbers and use complex numbers and polynomial identities and equations are not plus standards. It's further than that. The other thing I want to say is, in the books I've read that are critical of specifically saying something about the square root of 2, they only took a part of the standard. They didn't take the whole standard, which says use rational approximations of irrational numbers to compare the size of the rational numbers, locate them approximately on a number line diagram, and estimate the value of the expression. For example, by truncating the decimal expansion of the square root here, we show that the square root of 2 is between 1 and 2. Then between 1.4 and 1.5, and explain how to get better approximation. So saying start with that and go deeper and go deeper. And I think that's where you're saying, yeah, a number line gives a kid a good idea of where it is, and then you get closer and closer and say, you're never going to get the exact answer.
And that's where it ties into professional development, I think, again, because what I saw online were examples of problems that were given in classrooms. And they were actual assignments given to students. And it was, I can't remember, I think they were counting it correct if it was, they gave like a number line that only had the integers, and if it was correct if it was between 1 and 2. Is that beneficial to a student's understanding now? Would you want to spend much time on it? No, and I don't think, I think all teachers need to understand like exactly what you just said.
Well, would you consider that as a standard that would be applicable, that if you included something like this? I mean, it's like, do you know your ABCs from English?
And I think that we're not looking into standards, because like Bob said, this is a checklist. Those things are important.
But is it important for us to have it as something that we would further develop then into a standard, since this is a checklist? And I frankly don't see it.
Well, I guess that my question would be for this document.
No.
Right.
For what we end up with as
So it
the
depends
graduating seniors.
Well, I was gonna say, it depends on what placement. Is it, for me, important to have this matrix standard thumbs up? Is it important for me to have it as an exit for my school? No. So, you know.
Yeah, and so, and this right here, I thought what we were doing is looking at the exit person. Right?
And I thought we were looking at what we, to see if we were okay, but I'm not thinking that we're creating our 12th grade graduation requirements or anything at this point. I mean, or.
I think these are the baseline, we want to make sure that if we agree with these, that when we have standards at the end, that those things are somehow incorporated ideas in there that they can do these things. And I'm going to agree with you about comparing for realtors and things like that one. I've always argued with that with the low, except for square roots, probably it's more number here, the low where we should have an expectation of. But, you know, it's there, and that was something that was written in the document, so.
Well, anyway, as I was reviewing it last night, one that jumped out at me and hadn't hit me the wrong way.
Sure.
There's a couple of things I thought in this particular section were missing. One was conversion factors and significant figure concepts, factoring, least common denominator, and greatest common fraction.
I think factoring is an algebra. Factoring is an algebra section. It's not in the numerical
You're
calculation.
talking about factoring numbers though.
I don't know about factoring numbers, yes.
Yeah, but I would contend that factoring numbers goes back to what you're saying about approximate amount of number is prior to.
That's right, that's right.
I would say that also.
I think prime factorization, needs to be discussed.
Yeah, because usually that was only introduced in 6th, 7th, 8th grade when I was.
Well, I think what you're saying is part of number one.
On that
I mean, operations with, yeah, number one, operations with rational numbers. You have to have common denominators, and that's what, it's just in one big statement there.
Right.
And I think they did that because they assumed that's what happened.
Okay, and then what about significant figures? Because that means.
And I will tell you that mathematics they very rarely
But,
address sequence. So it's very rarely in any document anywhere about sequence in a math document. That doesn't mean it's right, okay, but I don't think you're gonna find in many math documents anywhere in standards that you're gonna find
And
sequence.
I've had many discussions, over the years with usually physics teachers and my own students that a lot of them take physics and calculus simultaneously, and they operate in that realm when they're in their physics class, and we operate in real numbers and calculus.
Okay.
And,
I
so
carry
it
it
hasn't been
back.
a problem. It hasn't been a problem in my classes. The children have been able to, do that.
Yeah, they've been, once if they have a good understanding, they can usually make that adjustment quite easily. And I mean, but I don't know, at least I've never seen it in a math document.
No, I haven't
seen it. I've seen it in science documents.
Later on, because I read the ones in the back, were like the engineering documents and those, and certainly that concept should be.
Well, and where we're at right now, we've spent 30 minutes and we're on page 26 and we allotted 45 minutes, so do we need to discuss?
Can I suggest that Fred, look up the list of people that are on the 612 science work group and maybe try to get their contact information if you're concerned about that being, that should maybe address in their group.
You mean not the
Significant
You mean
figures.
the other, not the actual.
Right, there's a science group.
Science.
There's a 612 science group, and,
Okay, I was wondering if someone could explain to me the difference between what A and B are on algebra. That is-
So are we done with numerical? Does anybody have any questions about numerical?
Only make one comment to make you clear conceptual math, I'm tough at, but my students, we want answers that we can use to do something. Substitute, keep, square root of 2, square root of 2, reverse things like that. We need the other side also, so we can use it.
the approximation.
And it'd be nice if they knew really much exactly what to do.
What happens in points?
Yeah.
Right, great.
Well, you have such a good application of conceptual understanding.
Yes.
You're giving them the need to know the problem solving that we
And I love that I'm
sometimes miss
taking,
in the
often
classroom.
I'm taking this standard and this standard and this standard, and putting those together in a
Yes.
situation.
Because it works for solving this problem.
Because the problem is more complex than any one content statement.
And so, is there any other discussion about the numerical? Because the only, I had one or two that we can decide whether those are really critical or not. And that goes back to set terminology, set operations. I think those terms are important, but those are just something we should keep in mind, but I don't know yet how critical that is, and I don't even know in the higher board if that is going to be there or not. So those are just something that.
Maybe in 12 and 14. and
12, yeah, 12 and
Top
14.
is 27.
Yeah, so those are just something to keep in mind, I'm not sure, Dr. Lucky, and then notation, set notation, in understanding it, but when they talk about interval notation over the years, I've taught that interval notation has changed, so my question is what interval notation system we're going to use? And so things like that, those are important, but those are just kind of big ideas that we need to kind of keep in mind is how critical is that for an exit statement. Anybody else on any of the numerical operations, any comments?
I had a question. Where do students work with conversions? For example, feet to meters,
That's an elementary school.
that's an elementary, because I looked briefly through.
Elementary, no, but it's not.
Page number 9 on page 26 is on page 26.
Number 9.
And on this, a little bit of
Elementary, understanding.
Oh, okay. Center.
But right now, credits are where we teach it is taught in elementary levels. before we go to
Okay,
high school.
so they are, you actually have that.
Yeah, and well,
And what about the alleys, leaders, and,
it's been taught.
I would say then,
On page 22 of the.
yeah, because in some of the science classes right now, they don't seem to have really grasp.
I'm not going to measurement is
And
the
it's
lowest
ours.
nationwide.
All of us,
Nationwide, it was at the
and you know why? The main reason is because we have to teach two systems.
Yeah, metric and standard.
Don't worry
It's all
about
at
it.
the end of the book.
Tiffany, which one were you talking about on 42?
He was talking about whether or not the conversions and measurements are in there, and the first time that it's mentioned from 6 on is on page 42.
Okay.
I'll check on the common core document.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is there is, the use ratio reason to convert measurement units.
Okay.
Conversions, like a function here.
Okay, what I was talking about.
Yeah, she's familiar with this, and so she knows where to get
Which
the
page?
Page
Six.
42, page 42.
And it starts before 6th grade.
Yes, but that's.
For our grade.
For our grade.
Most of the time, the fourth and fifth grade is within a system,
Yes.
a metric. But once you get to sixth grade, then you can use the ratio and proportion to start on between systems.
Right, so practice.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I want to meet some more work.
Yeah, there was that. That's nothing new. Nothing new. So any other questions about number and operations? Because we've gone now 35 minutes, we have 10 minutes left to continue talking about this. Oh, 34.5, okay, that extra 30 seconds, we can get this done. What about algebra? Oh, I'm sorry, were there any other questions or comments about?
Let's go on.
Okay, so what about algebra?
There, I was wondering if somebody could distinguish what B means under one algebra.
I just want to make sure that this applies.
They did things
It
like.
makes
How's
sense.
that same thing?
It makes sense.
Okay.
Okay.
And then on C, it says apply properties of exponents and radicals. Usually when I apply something, I apply it to something. What are they talking about in terms of apply?
Well,
You
I
mean
don't-
applying the properties to solving problems.
Oh,
Yeah, I don't think it's application.
No, it's just like taking expert attendance to the third one you get, and, you know, they're not, that, and that's the major issue you have with most of
The
it.
skill.
It's a skill list, it's not a conceptual understanding. Okay, so I good.
okay, I was looking for the concept there. The other thing that I thought was missing from algebra was matrix. Because that, to me, They do say use different techniques in that, but I was wondering if they really had, I would have expected something about matrix theory and how that works with
And I,
multiple linear equations.
and what I should say to that is that it's not necessarily something that all students, so even though I love matrices and always taught matrices in algebra two, if you're talking about basic level competencies, or entry level competencies, I'm not sure that would be enough for your kids going into science and engineering, yes.
Yeah,
The
but
other kiddos-
we're talking about algebra two as well.
Right, but that's not, yeah, I mean,
Well, I think the reason maybe that the college, people or everybody involved, I'm not sure why it's not in here, it's a broad topic. But, usually in schools, we introduce something 1 year and use it to build on the ideas. And so the first time that, I know when I was in high school, very small town, we did matrices a lot, everything by hand. We had no graphing calculators. And we went up to 3 by 3. And I walked into, when it was Southwest Missouri State, and in Springfield, I walked in there, took their placement test and placed into calculus, and I didn't see a matrix again until linear algebra, if I remember correctly. And, they weren't used at that time broadly as far as what the schools see. I think it would be really beneficial now, though, to have a basic understanding in Algebra 2, because they have a lot of applications in programming, and a lot of students are interested in computer science. And, that's an application of the mathematics idea. And I don't think, we may discuss where it would leave off, exactly what we're talking about there. But I think it is something that all students can be introduced to in school.
and I think the reason that it wasn't here, you'll find that in science, I think it's probably the science and engineering, I can't remember, I was talking about this last time. But it was again going back to all students that were going for science, engineering field, but matrices is something that we feel that
It's an addition, I think we need
We
to,
can
I
look
would
at-
certainly recommend that.
Yeah, we can look at it, we'll look at it. What else, anybody else? I know, Lisa, do you have anything that you read on current algebra that you had?
I was really just trying to gather information on everybody else's feelings on this. I have read both documents many times before, and so I can't think of anything right
How
now.
about you, Maggie?
What,
Check out my things, I read 2 deputies
Right,
for what is traditional in my mind.
but was that, so when you're looking at the algebra standards, that was something that you felt was really.
What I mean, the things that were listed were typical algebra things.
So you didn't have any issue necessarily with anything that was listed here, with the exception of that?
Yeah, as far as I can do it.
Okay.
Any credit?
I've got one other thing, on the communicating, on number F here, 5F. Communicate accurately using the vocabulary symbols of algebra. And this is a checklist, but I think it should be much more expanded upon in order to say, what are we really talking about here?
Well, and normally, people in K-12 education do always, words that are not explained with many examples. Normally, they have the glossary available and the supporting materials, and that's what, that's what we were talking about yesterday, was that they're, the framework of the standards.
Credit, what I believe that means, this is just from an assessment point of view, is that up to a certain point, a student doesn't have to represent things symbolically. He or she can write things out, write them out using words. They're not using equations, they're not using variables. They're literally writing things out when these kids take these tests. This is saying, we want you using symbolic algebra. We want you formulating equations rather than saying my apples plus Johnny's apples, EQUALS, the total, or something like
That's
that.
another reason why I chose to share that, my, idea on the logarithms, on the definitions that I was noting, what I shared with the group, noting the symbolism in the document here that did explain, in my view, better what they meant by logarithm, with logarithm. So it's, there's a, between the words and the symbols that we use, that's part of the learning curve for all children at different levels.
Okay.
So I think that's all that means. Did you have any questions?
What,
Because we got.
yes, but essentially what I'd like is I'd like a bit more granularity. When we have ours, I'd like it to be as granular as possible so that
Well, you
there's
can't
no
do that.
misunderstanding.
Well, you need to be cautious about that too, because if you have it too granular, then.
Not too granular, no, but it has to be sufficient. But this right here is, to me, is too granular.
Okay,
And
so
you don't
when
want
we get to that one, we
Who
can.
wrote these?
Right, yes.
These are from the mathematician.
Hey, any other algebra stuff?
I just wanted to point out that that's where we need to move from this to.
Sure.
Okay, so geometry.
Geometry.
Okay, before we do that, number 6.
Number 6 on.
6A on that. It says upon relevant graphs. Again, relevant is a word that bothers
I don't think that's kind of, I don't think that we need to diagram those axes or anything. I think we need to just say, this is something that we can adapt. We're just kind of looking at it.
Right.
But is plot graphs, would that be better for you?
Probably.
Yeah,
Okay,
There,
so,
in that case.
so the concept of this is bizarre, it's just.
That's right. So we
Okay, so is there anything else that's bizarre to you there?
Well, nothing that I can bring up.
See, I think we need to keep in mind that we're looking to see, are these standards something that we need to incorporate K-12? Not necessarily the wording of the standards, but is this concept something that we need to make sure that we include?
Are there missing concepts?
That's it.
That's what we're talking about.
Correct, so not necessarily the wording that they chose.
Right,
Because I'm not ready to accept everything we read there.
absolutely.
Yes.
Geometry.
Geometry.
Yeah, 30 seconds per page, right?
Theorem proofs and the logic of them is a critical component to anything in geometry as far as I'm concerned. And that appeared to be something that's missing.
Formal proofs,
Formal proofs and the logic. Yes, formal proof and logic.
paragraph proofs instead of,
And again, this group of people, they're not really that concerned, students coming into a gen ed lab, I said they can do improve the class. It's not to say it's not important, that they're not concerned.
Right, if not, if you're entering into college algebra for other things, it's going to be important, but not for that. In geometry, do we have any other issues on geometry that we think maybe something's really missing or something isn't appropriate to be there? Maggie, do you have anything?
by the way,
You don't have anything, Maggie? I said, okay. So that over, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Lisa, and do you have anything? Bob?
Yeah.
Dave?
No.
No? Margaret? Okay.
I pulled this up on digital form so that I can search for words. In case when you say something, I can search for them and see an extension. And I do notice on page 29, it does say, use, I'm sorry, Kathy, what?
This is number 6.
Yeah, that's
Right?
good. Use web increasing to develop.
Simple geometric proofs,
Yes.
yes. No, I did see that.
So I wanted to bring that up so you feel a little more comfortable.
Yes.
I want to point out one thing, are we on page 29?
I think so. I think we're okay.
Okay, I just wanted to point out one thing, that in this, in this report that we're all looking at, conic sections have a star on them, and you can read there what the asterisk is supposed to indicates in this document. I believe they also have everything except the parabolas, the functions, parabolic functions are also plus standards in the Common Core, if they're in there at all. I'm not sure.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
I'm talking about conic sections.
Yeah.
And I see here they have a plus asterisk in the CAI document.
Mm-hmm.
And in the Common Core, do they just have the parabolas that are functions? What do they have about circles and ellipses?
Oh,
There's a lot of
hyperbolas?
No, they don't. I think that it was because they were writing, in my opinion, where most people are teaching, and most don't do conic sections in Algebra 2 class.
We have in my entire career.
I understand that, but if you survey most school districts, that would not be the case, because I also taught conic sections, but I was one of the few in my district that did. And most districts, when I surveyed around, don't teach that in Algebra 2.
You know,
they're in what it's called.
You live somewhere.
Like I said, I currently teach in a suburban area in Ocala, Missouri, because where I live, I teach in St. Charles County. I grew up in a very small town, Buffalo, Missouri, and we had an introduction at that time. We did not have calculus in our school. We had a class called pre-calculus, and we did, and that was, I graduated in 1983, and we did all of the introductory level to the conic section, then as far as just understanding the rational equations and the graphs, introduction. So that's, I'm almost 50.
I got you. And granted, and again, it was done as well. However, I think you will find that many schools do not do conic sections in Algebra 2, and that it's taught in most of our pre-calculus classes. And I think this goes back to this document, looking in here, that for conic sections for kids entering into, and I love conic sections, okay, that was one of my favorite things to teach. But entry level into college algebra, they didn't do that as being something that was an expectation.
You don't do conic sections in college,
Yeah.
because it's a towards modeling course,
Right,
and we use functions, and hyperbolas and ellipses are functions.
right.
So, yeah.
So, it is you have something left, and because it's 4 minutes past time,
And
and,
did not address statistics.
right. because
Right,
we're-
that's what I was going to bring up, is that probability statistics are not addressed at all,
Right.
and that's a separate section.
And this was something to me that was shocking about this document when it came out, I made comments about it. Just my comments just got pushed aside, but, our gen ed, I'm trying to think of the word for it, but the requirements for our gen ed courses for our, state agreement include that all gen ed math courses have to be probability.
And should.
And that's when we changed our college algebra model, because we said, we're not just gonna stick it on the end of the course, we're gonna make it part of the course. So I was shocked when none of that ever made it stuff. I thought it should have been in here too.
Yes.
So probability and statistics, I think, is extremely vital.
Is a complete separate section, and I think it needs to be.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I agree.
And it needs to be integrated all.
And with the degree of specificity that we have.
Well, that's the same thing that Julie had said before she left.
Right.
I think that was her idea.
And so we've gone through these pages, we have not looked at the exit, or the nets. Do we want to now look at the 6th grade? Or do we want to continue with this document and postpone the 6th grade to the next time? Should we look at 6th grade?
I think we should look at 6th grade and agree to come back to this document later.
Yeah, so when we come back, I think we're on our agenda items, right? Come back and look at those.
You want to update? Okay, thank you.
You go.
I got to the information.
Got it.
I'm not sure, I'm just gonna email from We'll do it.
I just have a general concern overall with what we consider plus standards and how those and what their definition is of plus.
Okay, so we're gonna look, at the sixth grade document, is that right? I have to go back and look at the sixth grade document. And I know they have that one page that's kind of a general, which is the basics for when you start there, when you start the.
Yeah, I'd like to just make my point again, but I've said it before, but I think it's really, really, really important. I think the most important thing in all of the Common Core standards on mathematical practices, and I think that's just so crucial for whatever grade band, whatever math you're talking about. And
I
that's
think
why
it
think
doesn't emphasize too much, and I think you're right now.
I think the opposite.
It's such, I consider
Because I think that's where I think that's where students use mathematics, this idea of making sense of problem, persevering, solving. A lot of the things that you brought up, like attention to precision, that's a standard. We want our students to learn, I don't care what grade level they're at, they learn to be precise with what we're teaching them. Looking for making use of structure. I just think that's the most important part of the standards.
Yeah, and I'd like to piggyback on that. We were talking about page 25 earlier, and we were talking about the mastery of mathematics and the conceptual understanding. My first thought as I went through this is, it's the same thing as the mathematical processes in what we currently have. Because if you look at those, there are a lot of the same things.
when we met as two separate groups yesterday, and what do students need as they go, and one of the first things I think, was problem solving, communication, reasoning. It's like, oh, we're reciting the mathematical practices.
And I don't know if you're familiar with those, maybe you read the mathematical, have you read the mathematical practices or you read the problem?
I'm not sure we can.
Where?
I saw the little,
Yeah, that's right.
But there's, well,
Yeah, I
there's a
did.
there's a nice explanation at the beginning of page six.
Can I share something with the group that colors my opinion on why I believe they may, on how they're shared within school PD. You can see there that we receive in our PD, a lot of information. Just one of the pieces of information was a guide to the mathematical practices. And everyone probably in the room understands what was trying to be conveyed in number 3. And it's talking about mathematically proficient students. Does everybody see the page that I'm talking about?
Talk about
I'm sorry.
Are you looking at the
That's the sum.
What page do you want?
When I'm looking at page 6, and number 3, where it's talking about constructing viable arguments and critiquing the reasoning of others. Now, just for example, a reference point, yesterday I shared with you that the 3, ordered pairs that were not well defined in that problem. And the SBAC problem that I gave, in my opinion, it wasn't very well defined as a linear function. It didn't say the word. And I demonstrated how it could be misinterpreted and misapplied. And actually, mathematically, there was not a right answer to that problem. Okay, so considering number 3 here, constructing viable arguments and critiquing the reasoning of others. You know, I'm not a psychologist, and I don't have any proficiency in critiquing, you know, people's reasoning. I do, however, have a little math background, and if we're talking about mathematics, then I think we're on the same page, and that's what this document is trying to convey. Okay, what I received last week prior to my school PD, professional development is what that means. The high school math teacher in my school, and we're all very conscientious. We received a guide, and it was a guide to the 8 mathematical practices. And it listed this, you know, it listed all the mathematical practices, but not the wording in the Common Core. And let me just say, it was interpreted, number 3 was interpreted to mean this. And I was disturbed when I read it. It says, be able to talk about math using mathematical language to support and oppose the work of others. Now, that is an issue, is the mathematical language. That's what we're talking about here. And when I looked up the source, let me just say it real quick. When I looked up the source, this person is an elementary educator, and I understand exactly what was trying to be conveyed there. But I didn't think that this guide was appropriate for high school teachers to receive on PD. And some of the examples that we were given also, I did not feel were appropriate.
Can I ask, is the issue the standard, or is the issue the PD that was delivered to you? Because I think we've talked about that we need to qualify what is the PD, and I will disagree with you, because when I do debate on that practices, if it's elementary teachers there, we approach it from this point. If it's middle school, we approach it from this point. If it's high school, we do a totally different thing about it.
Exactly.
So,
I've heard, I shouldn't say this, I'm mad. I've heard some pretty bad sermons, but it doesn't make a question about it. I'm not trying to equivocate.
That's very good.
No,
I'm just saying, because somebody delivered the wrong message, doesn't mean the original thing was wrong.
and I would like to say with the most respect to you and your experiences, Susan, that I would like us to direct our conversation on what's here rather than your experience with something individually.
I wanted to explain why I disagreed with Fred, that the mathematical practices should not be the focus.
You mean Bob?
Bob, I'm sorry. I like the fact that we're
We've got
focusing on
31 months.
content here. Very
We've
much.
got 31 minutes.
right, and so I don't think that the practices help you. I think just, if he hasn't read them yet, needs to read them to get a feel for that, whether it's today or whether it's some other time. And we can discuss that later today, but the PD that's given, that is by individual district, by individual people, so we don't have any control over that. So,
I think the practices are how students do that content.
Okay,
They're the doing verbs.
Yeah, that was my question was, it's on the pages that I read, it was sort of in a separate little box. And I didn't know, how does that little box relate to the other? There's no functional involvement there.
It's
So
the
that's not good.
It's the same thing as I made a point of in this document, which is written mostly by mathematicians. That mathematics is a way of understanding the process of how collectively attached procedures to be run and applied separately. This is the way we do it. And it's a guide for how we do it.
so is that clarified for you when they list those over there, what those mean?
Okay.
Now, if you look at page 39, which starts at page 6 on each grade in this, or each course, we'll start, I'll talk about 6, 7, 8 right now. They'll start with a little description that tells you what kind of major emphasis of those focal points should be. So this is talking about our critical areas: connecting ratio and rate, multiplication and division, completing understanding of division of fractions, understanding of number system, writing, interpreting, and using expressions and equations, and developing understanding of statistical thinking. That's the first time that statistical thinking is introduced.
Yes, ma'am. I would say since we are looking at documents and citing all that, as a teacher, I love this first, the format. I love it because it helps me know, because truthfully, you can put whatever you want on paper, but I have to implement it, and I only have a certain amount of time to implement it with my kids. And I have to take in their background, and I have to take in whether or not they get fed at night, and I have to take in all these other things as well. And so I have a set number of days with them, and yes, I teach everything, but this helps me focus my time better. So in whatever standards we write, I would love to see something like this, the visualization one that helps teachers know where to focus their time and energy the most.
And what major things are being introduced, like
Correct.
statistics. So this is excellent. This is,
I'm not saying you have to use this wording, I'm not, but I would love to see something like this. It's really, really helpful.
So, yeah.
Okay, I think it's great. I found the format to be something that is good as well, because I think there is granularity to that. One of the concerns that I had when I went through this is that it assumes that all the prior things are finished, done. And that's why some of the concepts, such that you were talking about before, that I would like to see students continue to get practice in, such as unit conversions, and those type of things that we know that where they are deficient. So if we could arrange it so that it's not just, that this is talking about building on other things, but I want to make certain that they, as part of that clarification, that they understand that they need problems that still relate back to some of those other areas. That bring that forward and continue to reemphasize that as they go forward.
We need a few more days in the school year.
And that was one of the biggest complaints people had with the GLEs, was that we would take something and it would be here, I'm going across grades.
Yeah.
And so when the seventh grade teacher looked at it, it's like, why, it's 73 things I have to cover this year, or 142, more like that. And how am I going to do that? That's one of the things that we've tried. It is a concerted effort here to reduce the amount of constant review. It's not that you don't use those things in other things.
Still bring it back.
Of course, but the focus is on this year's grade.
Yes.
And I know you do have to, and anything, like for example, if you do probability, you use fractions. You have to. And so fractional stuff comes up over and over and over again.
But if they could introduce some of that for the equation solving, if they could have that for unit conversions as they do that, it's a good way to reemphasize, bring that stuff along.
That's the coherence of this, Fred, is that in sixth grade, we are using the fractions in ratio and proportion as we're introducing them in one-step equations, as we're doing those things. We're finishing up fractions here with division, so those things are being interwoven here. One of the reasons we don't reiterate those standards from earlier grades is not just what Bob said, but often it's the standards that people build the assessments on. We don't want 200 standards to choose from for what our assessments are going to be on. So we list, of course, and I'm being a little bit extreme here, but in calculus, we don't say students will know how to add fractions with like denominators. But we don't do that, so we don't keep reverting back like that. You list what is new in that course, and it's understood that you may have to leave some of those things up.
There's a little bit more of a statement to that, because work I've done, career ed, for the about 150 standards in high school, and we're supposed to align to high school tonight. 25, we've now been able to stretch it to some extent in some areas. But the 8 practices, we can emphasize that a lot. But then on page 84, there's a sentence, the third paragraph, that I also grab a hold of related to that. 84, page 84. Oh, okay.
Yes.
And it's about,
Third paragraph.
third paragraph, there's a plus sign on the left-hand side, but you go across there to the word indeed, the sentence starts on the word indeed. That sentence right there.
That's a true statement, isn't it?
And I refer to that often because career ed teachers want to know why I give these kids these fractions in my class, why can't they measure? So I needed to do, and I say, well, they did that, that's not in the high school curriculum, right? But we can work on that some more.
Because it's almost as if because the later tests aren't on that, I was wondering if there's some way we could
I wouldn't mind at all expanding that.
to somehow use those concepts when we are defining our geometry and algebra problems.
But not pile on a bigger list.
No, not pile on a bigger list, but just incorporate that as a part of it.
All of that.
As an example.
Yeah, as an example, yes.
Because what you're really talking about is a curriculum now, as opposed to.
Yeah, this is standard.
So I think they're, when we're talking about it, there's standards, and there's a curriculum of model problems and suggestions, but.
But then there's the way we want to implement the standards,
Right, so.
is utilizing that general
So,
approach.
right, and so the standards, if you give them 150 standards to put all those things together, is, teachers will just get frustrated and be like, sit and shake your head, yes. But it is important that, yes, they do that, and here's what I'm gonna say, okay? Any good teacher does that naturally, okay? And if they're not doing that, maybe it's because they've never given any guidance to do that. Did anybody ever have to tell me to do that? No. Okay, did I do that? Yes. Okay, because nobody should have to tell me as a high school teacher that I need to do that. However, we know that doesn't happen. So
And if we're setting
perhaps
standards,
send it out, but we, that when we're talking a little bit more is about, I think, a curriculum document than just standards. Is that what we can say?
I would agree to a lot of that. It's just, it would be nice, I think, just maybe at the end, along with the learning standards, and throughout, you see, we keep coming back to classroom methods. And I think, a guide with many, many examples would be really helpful, but not too prescriptive. That's the problem.
Right, because I think every time you start to give an example, then people think that's what they
Indeed.
have to do.
Right.
Which is not true at all.
Right.
But that's one of the arguments that people have about the Common Core when they give
Right.
suggestions. What's a suggestion? It's nothing you have to do.
Which-
It's just an example.
The bill alludes to the appendices, which is what the ELA appendix does.
Suggest.
When you start to suggest examples, they think it is the law.
And so we just have to be very careful about that, is all I'm saying.
Since we're talking about sixth grade, I don't know, I want to hear what people don't like that, but I just want to say, I love the statistics and probability section.
Yes.
Statistics is my thing, okay? But the fact that in sixth grade, they're developing the understanding of statistical variability, which is the key core concept of all statistics. And it's really, they do measures of central tendency in fifth grade, but this variability thing at this point, it's such a nice development of it here. I love it. So,
They probably follow the A's document.
it is, it's based on the
A's document.
Statistical Association, or what do they call it, ASA, American Statistical Association recommendations. But this idea of developing the idea of variability, which for a long time, introductory statistics kind of left out. It's really a nice development, I think. So,
I'll say from a teaching standpoint, sometimes when we're thinking all students, there are some things in there, when we're trying to decide how to go into depth. Some of them are a little scary because.
this is one of them.
Because,
Yeah, that makes sense.
because some of those sixth graders just, it's they really have a lot of trouble understanding what it means.
So that's again where, I mean, I've done professional development on the state, trying to help middle school teachers know what this might look like at the middle school level. And it's very doable. It's just not what you do in a college statistics class, but it's very doable. So,
Well, and it's not just standalone.
No.
Because with the progression, it comes back and builds, so you get to and we know, not all those light bulbs come on at the same time. So it's just, knowing that progression, that it's, we've got a couple more years to refine it. But it definitely was a new idea, but I do like it.
Number 3 is what we're talking about on page 45.
6SP, I'm just talking about the whole thing, statistic property, which is on page 45.
Domain.
You were talking about variability.
Yeah, I mean, that's relevant understanding.
I think specifically we look at 5C.
That's what commercial.
Yeah, got it. But that's where it talks about man. Right.
Right.
Yes.
Just about the sales and products, I had a question on number 4 in the geometry. What are the names? Like it's like,
Mass is when you unfold it, so it's flat.
oh, okay.
So like if you were making a cereal box,
Okay.
what would it look like going
I
through
didn't get that out.
the machine so it could be folded up to hold the cereal?
And that's a great way to relate two-dimensional surface area and surface.
Yeah.
How big a sheet of paper you
I
have
think
to
it was
have?
in the GLAs prior to that.
Yeah.
Because that is important shapes.
Yeah.
Right, I would say that before we get to statistics and probability, when I went through a couple of the standards, my main issues were when I got to on page 42, and talked about the healthy system. And part of this goes back to the definition of what it means. When you say compute fluently, when I look at 2 and 3, what the heck does fluent mean? And I think there's no clear definition of that, and because I've worked with multiple school districts, and I'm in one school district, and they're doing multiplication math, and their fluent is they can do so many in a minute. Okay, they may have to do 30 in a minute. I can go to the school district next door to them, and their fluent is 13 in the same time frame. So there is no clear definition about, in this document, I think.
But how do you, I mean, how do you?
With lots of examples.
No, but I mean, how do you define what fluency is?
Is that something we could add in the glossary?
Right.
I mean, you're gonna say, well, students have to be able to do 30 problems, and
Right.
you want to say that.
And 100 problems.
Yeah.
Exactly, and I think the word fluent is vastly misinterpreted throughout for different people doing different things.
And that's where, to
Right.
me, the assessment will help people understand what fluid is.
And I guess I really take issue because it says using the standard algorithm.
Right.
On both of them. Well, and I have a problem saying using the standard algorithm, because if a kid can compute as quickly without the standard algorithm as with the standard algorithm, why are we dictating the method to do it? I can do it just as fast without demonstrating the standard algorithm.
And I think that's a major objection a lot of people have had, was a particular algorithm, because some of them expand over a whole page, what we used to do with just a few columns.
But would it be because you are gonna need to know that standard algorithm for whatever comes in 7th grade or 8th grade or so on?
No, you really don't.
Well, and I think that's what
So
we're
which one?
Yeah, it depends on what standard we're trying to get specifically. Because if we're talking about multiplication of polynomials, eventually, is there a process that they need to do that knows more than one way to multiply polynomials? So part of that would be, I have an issue saying, if they're fluent with it, does it have to be by the standard algorithm? It doesn't mean that we don't show it, but it's, do they have to be using the standard algorithm to show fluency? And what is the standard algorithm? Our definition of the standard algorithm, I think in the United States, is not the same as it is in the.
I have 4 students who do different algorithms.
Yeah, and they're much more efficient.
They're efficient.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
So there's no really, I don't know if they meant for that to be some particular, or just whatever your standard algorithm.
Yeah,
I
well,
think
I'd
that-
rather just eliminate those words.
Yeah, I agree.
yeah, and so fluency, what is fluency? And I don't think we can define it. I think it's a danger in putting in there to be able to do that. But using the standard algorithm, to me, if I could define a standard algorithm, I don't know, but I think I would say something that's always going to give you the correct answer and the efficient answer.
But there are people who fight for the standard algorithm. That's why I think it would be.
I think it is. I think it was so easy, but I don't disagree.
Just real quick, the guy that I was referring to earlier, in their explanation of reason abstractly and quantitatively, it describes, if students have a problem, they should be able to break it apart and show it symbolically with pictures or any way other than the standard algorithm.
Well, but I think you're talking about having a problem with something, you know, that's an elementary perspective.
Well, that's an explanation of, like I said, it's a guy,
And that's his explanation.
it's a lady.
Well, okay, it's an explanation that somebody made up. And there are, and I can tell you, you go out and search, you'll find a ton.
And sometimes I think they say fluently, or they say particularly standard algorithm, kind of to say, you gotta show me how you got it.
Yes.
Or understanding what the algorithm
Not
is doing.
one particular procedure, but you have to show me your procedure more or less, is what I think is interpreted from some of those. What is your standard algorithm? Show me what you're doing.
Yeah, because that is very different.
Yeah, but we all agree
But
that the
important.
goal is efficiency.
Something that I do agree that standard algorithm, that leaves a lot of gray areas for teachers because then we're wondering, okay, factoring, we have to use prime factorization, is that the need one to use, or can we use super clutter, or all these other things? But I do think we need to leave some things in there where we're not getting too far away from the actual mathematics portion. For if I use line of multiplication, that shows me nothing about place value. Now, I know that as a teacher, I can hire my kids to do it with the standard algorithm, and I understand that. But my thing is, I want to leave it open for different processes, but I also think that there are some processes that in order to be successful in future math classes, they may probably still need, and with those, I think.
Yeah, I think the key here, this is talking about fluently computing things, fluently doing, so whatever is efficient.
Right, and I don't think that we just need speed necessarily.
No,
But that is what's defined by those solutions, when they say fluency,
Speed.
time, visibility,
Oh, see, to me, it's more,
accuracy
how
is
do you
being
get the correct answer?
right?
It's
You can be fast.
That's what it is.
Yes, yes. Reading comprehension, 0. Speed, fast.
Another,
It's like 11 minutes to 2 or 2 o'clock when you stop and put our agenda together.
I would like to use the restroom.
So, and I still have something in 6th grade, man.
Okay,
Well, that's what I was gonna ask.
Like, we can on 5 minutes out.
we need to plan research.
And it is probably, and that is, one of my biggest issues with the Common Core state standards. It's probably one of the only ones that I really get crazy about. I don't have any idea why in middle school we don't, or anywhere, we mention circle graphs to prepare kids to know. It's nowhere in the document, and when I could ask the architects, I asked Dr. McCollum in his blog, and he told me I was the reason that American math is far behind, because I was making an inch deep in a bottom line. It's nowhere in the document, and he says that it's not our responsibility as math teachers to teach it. And I said,
Are you talking about Venn diagrams?
And so, circle graphs.
It has to be in there someplace.
And to me, it's a way that you can introduce it in ratios and proportions, or you can put it in data if you want, to prepare them when they get to high school to talk about the area
Yes.
sectors and all of that stuff. I think it needs to be somewhere in there. And it's one of my issues that I am so
I think the reason it's not in there, and I don't know anybody who wrote the standard, like I said, but I think that they heavily the data probability stuff off the Gates documents, statisticians don't like circle graphs.
Yeah, sure.
But I think it can be used in other places, you're right.
I told them about racial proportions, or
Yeah.
some, connecting the geometry of the angle measure to
I agree.
area of the circle or whatever.
Yeah.
I was teaching that last night.
Yeah.
Because when you deal with vectors, you utilize some of the same concepts.
And also, I know they don't like simple graphs, but when you look in the newspaper, things that kids are going to use each day, they don't often use box and list.
That's why they don't like circle graphs, because most of the time when they're newspapers, they tilt them and make them three dimensional.
Yeah.
Wrong.
Well, I would say, I don't know, it was the PowerPoint that Tina shows us, what was I looking at recently that used, I'm sorry, my students, they used circle graphs completely incorrectly. It wasn't to show the percent of this compared to this. They were comparing one year to another one, was, I thought,
But there are some.
Yes,
different
I know.
circles.
and I didn't want to say something because it's not our board meeting.
Maybe the idea is that sometimes the pie gets bigger.
I'm just the one that says, excuse me, that is inappropriate, or it's not yet. And the guy who prepared it is new to the position, so I know he was a little nervous, but I'm going,
Well, it'd be natural when they're measuring angles, starting to work with angles.
racial proportion.
What a nice application.
So we all agree that's definitely.
Yeah.
It needs to be.
I don't know if that happens in sixth grade.
I said it was just ratios and proportions, and then
So we need to
ratios
decide.
and proportions.
So we need
This
to
is where
talk
it
with
starts.
fifth grade about this is something, is it in ratios and proportions or the introduction earlier, and that's something that, this is where we have that cross communication between
I think we-
us and the K.
I would also have it on the science reasoning subject test for the ACT.
Yeah.
And that's all graph communication, so anytime you
Yeah.
can refer graphs into this.
Those people who think that St. County Board, that's one is perfect, they're wrong.
Is there anything else in sixth grade that anybody just has a real problem?
Can I ask real quick who the man was that brought the copies in? Because somehow I did not get a copy.
I don't think we said we're only going to take four.
I didn't know.
That's- yeah.
I think I had it on my computer though.
Okay, I can use my
It's on Dropbox.
I'll have it.
Yeah. Yeah, you will. I'm just gonna make a copy. And so is there anything else in sixth grade that we saw as an issue that we think needs, that if we were looking at this document, not saying we are, but if we're looking at this, needs to be definitely feel it does not belong there, needs to be changed. Nancy brought up one that, whether it's sixth grade or someplace that definitely needs to be added, there's a question about that. Was there anything else specifically?
So we'd be okay with, this algorithms we took out, standard,
Yeah.
or even just using it out.
Well, yeah, we'll probably.
I think I just
massage
got
that
those
a little
last
bit,
words.
Yeah.
what the fluent and without.
Yeah, those two get fluid and algorithm, some standard algorithm. Needs to
And
have
then
some-
the definition of fluently.
What is it?
Or so.
Yeah, it's not
massaging.
Or
Because there's a definite misinterpretation, I think. of what it's telling you.
Yes.
Hey, we can use- I guess what I don't understand, or maybe need some clarification on is how, when we, I guess especially when we look at middle school, and we're saying these are sixth grade standards or seventh grade standards, how does that account for, the different courses? Because I know we'll have a seventh grader in math, but we'll have another seventh grader in algebra 1.
There is a, there is an appendix that talks about accelerated, that talks about a seventh grade accelerated to get them ready for algebra 1. That's not in the original document, that is in the appendix, because you're gonna have seventh graders that go into algebra 1 next year, that's kind of what we're talking about. And there is a document called Appendix A that gives a description of what they should do in seventh grade to be ready to take that eighth grade.
And I would suggest,
Then you drop out.
There's an appendix A, there's an accelerated seventh grade math course outline, or what they should be doing to get ready for algebra 1 and 8th grade.
And it's
So
no
we're-
different than our GLEs are.
Right, so we're saying that to take algebra 1 in 8th grade is an accelerated path?
Yes.
So let's just.
well, I would suggest that, you might want to read there was a National Mathematics Advisory Panel, and in their report, one of the recommendations was to prepare more students to try, to be ready for Algebra 1 in the 8th grade. So that's been an issue for a while in math, language and.
I know in my district, and my understanding is it's many other districts as well, are moving towards Algebra 1 being the 8th grade course. So we write new standards that say Algebra 1 for an 8th grader is accelerated. Is that the message we want to send?
Can I ask, in your district, do they get high school credit for that?
Yes.
If you look at it, I mean, go ahead, we jumped ahead, which we should do, but look at the 8th grade course standard. A lot of algebra in there.
A lot of people used to be.
It's not necessary, things have been moved, so
Yeah, but it's sort of.
probably wouldn't be as accelerated as you should.
Starting on page 80, and appendix A, if you want to make, I don't know that you.
You don't have problem with it, say, but it's not.
I'm not sure if it says accelerated in there, maybe just say.
Exactly. You can. She does not have.
You can look at practice.
I will say, as a
Here you go.
that's true.
Oh, I don't have to do
I'm right there, Fred. It's right there.
Also teaches on the
And on the standards, you look at like, what's standard class,
Not as an 8th grade math teacher who also teaches 8th grade algebra 1, not all 8th grade students in my district would be even close to ready to fully understand that curriculum we are currently teaching for
What
algebra.
I think, pushing kids into algebra 1 already is great, and I just caution, I was a district coordinator for math for a long time, and what is the reason that we have our kids take algebra 1 in 8th grade? Why?
So they can take one more class in high school.
But if they're not ready for it.
What's their?
Yeah, the whole point is that we would only want students that are ready
Yes.
and determining when they're ready.
But what do we want more than
That,
But for high, what's the point of giving 8th grade algebra 1? And I'm not saying the kids are ready.
Well, like this
But
year-
what's the point of giving algebra 1 in 8th grade?
My daughter took algebra 1 in 7th grade, geometry, or 8th grade, because she wants to go into engineering. She
Great.
and
Great.
science, she wants all the way.
And that's fine, but I'm saying, what's the point of all students taking?
We didn't say that.
We all know, but that's what we're saying, but so what?
If they can, why not?
Okay, here's what I'm gonna ask, again, what is the point of them taking?
Well, for one benefit, I know, students, we have a lot of students that take calculus in high school. My daily schedule is 2 algebra 2 classes and 4 calculus classes. And each year we range between 3 and 5 calculus classes. Those students, most of them took algebra 1 in the 8th grade. And maybe a few would have doubled up on a course in order to try to complete calculus in high school. And a good benefit to families is that it saves them money. And they can, the child can take the AP exam, or in some schools, they have an option of getting college credit. So,
And all of the statistics of just students completing at least one college course in high school for their completion rate are so much greater.
I'm not gonna disagree with that whatsoever, but my point was,
What is
I
it?
did a statistical analysis of the kids in our district who took algebra 1 in 8th grade, and the kids that took calculus. 25% of the kids that started in algebra 1 in 8th grade ended up in calculus. So if your goal is for those kids to take it,
no, that's
and that's why I asked, what is your goal? What is your goal? And kids that, you can take a college credit class and not take algebra. I'm not saying don't do it, I just say sometimes that we.
I think schools have a hard time of determining the readiness.
Right.
And I think that would be something that as a state we could really work on.
Well, but what she's saying, if her district wants to do it, that's great, but I just always.
I'm talking about the determining factor.
But always have reasons to why we do it, because we have a large number of kids that were not taking it in their senior year or junior year, because they had their credits in, and then when they went to college, they had forgotten.
That's what I wanted to say.
And so I have a plan, I mean, and that's just the point, you probably do, knowing you probably do. I guess it's, because you just don't want kids not to be taking math their juniors.
Right, and that's not really an issue because we kind of require them to take at least one math every 4 years. I guess, is it,
Did you
Not
do
every
that
day.
every year?
Every year, all 4 years.
yeah.
You said one every 4 years.
Our school is backed up on it, we would switch, I mean, all versus with my school, but my girls were there. But partly because they started collecting data and finding that the kids that, part of it has, well, but some of the kids who had 8th grade algebra were succeeding as well as all three had 9th grade algebra. Not all of them, but a higher percentage of them were succeeding in algebra than was geometry. And so it was a question of maybe they really weren't ready. And so it kind of actually stunned them a little bit.
Or was it mature?
I think,
Well, it could be that too, but that's why they were.
I really think that there is a difference between the middle school child in terms of motivation and the high school kids. It is very, very difficult to get your middle school kids to understand that what they are doing right now affects their career path, it affects their college path. It is, I mean, to get your honor students to understand that is
Sometimes it's
nothing.
more troublesome with the high school seniors.
Well, yeah, but at least there, they have to get credit, they have to get, you know, and so it's very hard to get that motivation. And then some of those kids that might not give you their best effort in 8th grade, by the time they get to high school, they're on it, they're ready, they realize what a difference it makes whether they step and whether they jump. And so I think that they get that information and they understand it a lot better as opposed to, it was covered, I was taught it one time.
And I think my point was not, I guess I should have really brought it up, but we just need to think about that when we're writing the document, because Evan, you brought up a very valid point. If we're going to take 8th grade down to one for us to say that sure or sure not, I don't think it's appropriate. I think we would have to develop a plan that would be that how do we get the kids ready for algebra 1 if we want to teach algebra 1 in 8th grade. So that was one of my points. So it is 2:02. So we're only 2 minutes behind schedule. I guess 2:02 and a half, almost 2:03. So we need that in the agenda. So, you know, the other things we haven't done today, we're going to do that again, is to liaisons. So the agenda for the next
I
meeting.
think like we should move on to 7th grade.
Okay,
I mean,
so
are we
are we
done with
finished with
6th
6th grade? Or do we
I
have
would recommend that the first item when we come back is just to have a brief, 20 minutes, no more than that, where we do a recap for anyone who wasn't here during these sessions.
And one thing that's really helpful, because I got the minutes,
Yeah.
emailed to me, people who aren't here to submit the
Yeah.
transcript.
And that means we also have to know who the other people are.
There you go.
Yeah, so that's your job, yes.
I didn't know. Well, there's some people on,
Maybe one of them just send it out. There you go.
there are people on the list who are here, whose names are on there.
So would you recommend that 20 minutes?
About 20 minutes to say, we'll get the story right. Because if someone reads through these and comes up with something, oh, you know, brilliant, then I'd like to make sure we.
And also to let them ask the questions if they had a question about something, but you want to limit that to
About 20 minutes.
that could,
Pit, mouse, traffic.
yeah.
20 minutes, that one, I don't know, no? What's your suggestion?
15 to 20 minutes, no more than.
Okay. I thought you were.
So we go 30. Because that could be, yeah, that would get under data we would.
My personal opinion is, those legislators who didn't name them on time should give them a tutorial somewhere.
That must be
Well, I was just, we were just talking about that, I think, maybe, when they turned in their applications, their email address would have been on there. So
I was.
if you could, send the, legislator that made that appointment, because I don't know who we're talking about, but they would have the email and maybe share that
Well, we'll
information.
make that meeting and maybe we'll talk about the, whoever we're meeting.
So do I need to put a 20-minute or less Q&A over last meeting
Yeah.
here?
Yes.
Because if you divide that 20 minutes proportionally, 10 minutes of it.
Well, there's a few minutes left for
Is that a ratio?
Should be 10 minutes for yesterday and then have
But don't you feel like we did accomplish something?
Yeah, it's in there.
I feel good because we're actually talking about math.
Yes.
We probably need to have a little time for introductions,
Okay, 10 minutes and 5,
because if we have new people, it would be nice to know.
5 minutes.
Right, go around the room, give questions on.
That's a minute per person.
Or the second. Well, all of us will have to introduce ourselves, so.
Could I ask that, on the form that we put in the computer, or I'm assuming that Jay has that too, add, their, I think it has our work experience right now, anyway, on that. Because if that was made available to the new people that came in or
They can,
whatever, yeah.
Did we need to put 6th grade here, or are we finished with 6th grade?
do we need to do anything else with 6th grade?
Is that included in public Q&A otherwise?
We've got 20 minutes, or that will be.
Okay, so then do we want to start then go to the higher ed,
Yeah, this is not ordered.
Yeah,
Okay.
we got those, so we got those minutes. And then after that, we did 6th grade, do we want to go then into 7th grade? That was
So
just
that
minutes.
was that for me.
We good with that? Yeah.
7th grade, Common Core?
Yeah.
Document?
Well, it'll be Common Core of Massachusetts document.
I don't think so, by October 2nd, 3rd. I don't think we'll have enough time to do the 7th grade. We'll look at that document, look at that one.
Oh, well, I thought that was, we were using them in conjunction.
I mean, do you want it for 6th or? And that's on the table, so.
Yeah, I thought that was, yeah, we were,
That doesn't mean that we won't address the Massachusetts stuff, so that means, you know what I mean?
yeah, we were rather going to call all through one, I mean, going all through. I thought we have them all at the same time, just to look at them.
Well,
Notes right.
on the, what might be helpful is, the form that I altered a little bit and brought back in today. I had sent that before the meeting this morning, before I left home, I had sent it, to Nancy, and, if you altered that form, like, you can add in your own thoughts on whatever document, and then, so that everybody just has a clear, organized,
And I agree with that, but we should all be reviewing the same documents. Otherwise, you look at something that I haven't looked at, and it takes time to
Right.
to go to that document.
Yeah, and I thought that was sort of the purpose of having these two that we both look at and doing grade by grade.
So here's my question then, is we want to look at the 6th grade, from Massachusetts, and the 6th grade from the learning goal that we talked about, California, do we want to look at those multiple documents? We can, I mean, this would be a whole marathon.
I don't think we need to look at California.
Okay,
But-
5th
but,
grade sent me those and said they are looking at them, so they sent me an email. Do you want me to add those to do you want me to add those to the Dropbox so that those who want to look at them can look at them? Yo. Oh, you're voting now? You're voting?
You already have
I created a folder in there that said from case files were group and it said full on
Cool. Into the California standard. So, but can we come to an agreement which ones we're going to review before we come back on?
Yeah.
So.
I'm just not guaranteeing that, I mean, right, we all have work that's getting backed up.
So we say, we're going to be ones.
Yeah, and so can we maybe be consistent about which ones we are gonna look at and agree upon, and we want to go beyond that, if that's okay? So, what's the consensus of the group? Have we looked at 6th grade Concord, do we want to look at 6th grade Massachusetts, although it's fit 6th grade?
What if we do, at least we make the 6th, 7th, 8th, and Common Core that goes something new? Because
Okay,
then we at least get a little bit.
get a flow.
Well, I thought the whole purpose was to look at them across the board so we can see. Because I prefer the spreadsheet approach.
See, this is identify similarities.
Right. Because it just helps, how are they covered in the different areas?
So then let's just do 2 at a time. Let's just do
Because,
2.
yeah, because I think that for me, and I understand because we all learn differently, if I'm gonna look at a document, I'm gonna look at 6, 7, and 8. At the same time, because or K grade, because I need to see where they start and where they take, because if I'm looking at too many different things, then I get really confused, so was that there, or was that here? So for me, it helps to do 6, 7, and 8. So if we want to do the others, I'm fine with that, but I'm gonna have to review 6, 7, and 8, and I'm just beyond me. That I'm gonna have to do that because that's what makes sense for me. if it makes sense for you to do sixth grade cross, we can do that, but for me, kind of, I'm gonna have to look at all of them to see how they flow together. Because we do too many disjointed things, that if we really don't look at how a document flows, then it becomes very difficult.
If we start, we've got 2 days.
Yes.
If we start, we'll probably be able to one day do 6, 7, 8, Common Core, 6, 7, 8.
We've already done six.
Massachusetts.
We've done
Shouldn't
six, we've done 6 and
We've already done
4.
Yeah.
In Massachusetts.
We did sixth grade in less than 40, about 45 minutes or less.
So by next time, let's look at the 6, or 5, 6, 7, or whatever, 6, 7 Massachusetts, and the 7 for the common.
7 and 8 Common Core, and 5, 6 and 7.
Yeah, 5, 6, 7, 8.
I would agree that we need to look at, and not as just, we need to look at 5, 6 in Massachusetts, because they're grouped together. And we need to look at 5 in Common Core, because we're seeing where they're coming from. And then we need to look at 7, 8 in both of them.
Okay. So let's do all that next time.
Do it.
So
Okay.
5, 3 on Massachusetts, and,
It's okay, we need some more now.
No, no, they're not in order, they're not in order.
Today, we're able to talk about college readiness.
Yes.
And I think we talked about looking at those as well.
Say what? All the Missouri or.
So the ACT college readiness standards, we talked about looking at those as well.
Yes, because some of those link to 7, 8 grade things.
yes, they do.
Really?
Yes.
Yes, they do very much.
So why don't we just,
They're behaving now.
narrow that then, 5 and 6 Massachusetts, 5 Common Core, because we had started the 6, and the ACT, so that, because I kind of like what we did today with the higher and the lower, and, you know.
And can I suggest,
Why don't we finish, we said we were gonna finish the middle school? Because 5, 6, 7, 8 kind of roll into each other. I know that you see on your perspective, or you talk about it up here, but 5, 6 rolls into 7, 8. You just kind of have that, that's kind of, high school prep, I'll call it, you know? And they roll into each other and they're real integrated in many of the documents you're talking about.
let's be prepared to do more. If we don't get it done, okay, but I'd rather be prepared.
And we did say that we would need 5, 3 for both of those documents,
Right.
and have the ACT, if necessary, the second day. We're probably not gonna get to 5, 3 for both of those
Say,
on the first day, but at least we could get started in the ACT, because I think you're gonna find there are a lot of them, that some of the 7 and 8 grade standards are in the ACT document as well. So I think we got a good feel for both documents, 5 through 8. Then we can look and say, okay, this is already addressed here, and then maybe, because I agree with you, we need to be looking.
Are the ACT that, Deborah's talking about,
yes.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
Here's what I have found and what I'm gonna put a document in Dropbox to say, okay? To answer when we're backing on the head with that marker, I'm wrong. 1, an introduction for 5 minutes or so. 2, question and answer from this meeting, less than or equal to 20 minutes. 3, higher ed, the exit and the net, okay? 4, 5th and 6th grade from Massachusetts and 5th grade from Common Core, we can, you know, bring it across to Massachusetts if we want. 5, 7th and 8th grade Common Core Massachusetts, and I'm talking about the 2000 frameworks, for 7th and 8th, and then ACT. Is that correct? Mhm. And then we can, I would suggest that.
I'm gonna write it okay.
We just want to,
Just get over it, mister.
And then,
I would suggest that, whether it's a liaison or whether it's a secretary type person here, get those extra names and get them out to them so they know the documents we're looking at before they walk in this group. Because we don't have that time, and for Julie and for Maggie.
yeah, because I don't hear either.
Yeah.
So I will email them if you want me to, I'll be in charge of emails.
I was wondering if we could also add to the agenda for October 2nd, some sort of discussion about how many times we do anticipate needing to get this completed, because that's something that
So we keep
I
the
think
agenda on
that would
the
be a
agenda.
good thing for the, end our discussions with.
I'm gonna need to, and I know we all say, because depending on how many meetings this will require, will definitely dictate my ability to participate throughout.
I think we should talk both about future meeting dates and how we're gonna organize our writing, because it's real evident that there are people who are kind of middle school specialists and people who are high school, you know, that have different interests. And it's not that we're going to ignore each other, we're eventually gonna have to get back together and make sure it flows and we've got everything covered. But, I think it would make sense for us to kind of designate an area to work on. And it would also be easier to work on those kind of individually before a meeting. You know what I mean? So if I'm working with Ann, I wouldn't have to not real hard with each other, if we wanted to meet physically, we could. Yeah. You know, I would
Well,
work hard
and-
and sit here, but, you
And
know.
to add to what you said is that, if we do decide to go that route, that information or the product of that work would be available to all anyway through the
Yes, that
Dropbox.
we would post it, you could send it to me, I could put it in the Dropbox, we could keep updated on what everyone's doing. You know, to start, kind of accelerating the work that we've been doing every single thing at this table with all of
I
you.
guess I'm confused, because I thought we decided that at least 9 of us would have to be present to meet.
Well, we can work to bring back to the group.
Yeah.
We're not talking about.
In other words, when we start writing, we can break the work up and bring it back.
And then we'll bring back recommendations.
Yes, I agree with you, Deborah, I don't think anything should be approved unless it is a meeting, but at work.
You can do this on these, because let's face it, there's some people that aren't gonna wanna be in on the writing of the high school standards. Okay, but looking at those, and there are gonna be some people that may not really wanna jump into the 6th, 7th, 8th grade. So,
And then
So
we'll have,
since 6th, 7th, 8th is on the table for October 2nd and 3rd,
yes,
we would need to look at 9 through 12. So is that coming with our next established meetings in October? I mean, I know you don't want to decide on that for sure, but can I kind of keep that at the back of my mind?
if we can knock out 6th, 7th, and 8th, and really look at that the next time we come back, and then come back and really then address 9 through 12 after that.
On the established dates.
I think so, yeah, you can make a
I
decision.
mean, I know it's not in concrete, but,
Right,
okay.
that's what I'm saying, yeah.
another thing that I think might be helpful is if, I mean, I don't know if this could be someone's task or if it's something they could do for us. Jake, could you go back through our, notes from yesterday and, make some sort of statement or something of how we came to the decision that we were going to look at Massachusetts and we were going to look at the different things we were going to look at.
I think that was part of the resolution, wasn't it? We did. We have a resolution that I made
That, the documents we were going to look at.
about the documents that we were going to look at.
I know, that
Was that a resolution?
the rationale of why we, honestly, I don't remember.
The way I recall it, we can go back and look at, that's what we were gonna start with, and we agreed that we would add things.
If we needed to, that's what.
Yes.
If people were to ask, well, why did the work group decide to look at Massachusetts? I think it would be nice if we had some documentation from rationale.
I do believe it should be on the minutes there because it was the basis of the resolution.
It should be.
It was because.
And I know there is a reason, I just don't remember what it was. So if we had that so that we were all on the same page, I'm sure it's in the notes.
The notes that I am writing also, I put a copy inside folder in Dropbox.
So it's there.
Notes to your work.
Yeah, so they're in there.
You can look and see.
And again, that will also be needed to go.
So it is 2:20. Is this all we're gonna have? Is this already in the meeting?
It's a good idea.
Yeah.
Okay, and so, should be a lot, approximately 45 minutes per time period that we looking at like today, it was 45 minutes was about right time, because if we have 3 hours, we will take 3 hours. I think when we have a time to get more focused in on what we have to get done and accomplished, do we want to put an approximate time when we did on those first 2 things? Do we
Well,
want to put an approximate time?
we'll improvise a little bit, we can come back, just like we are with that,
Right.
I read document, yeah. So we'll shoot for that, but it's not like we're
Is this your agenda for just one day?
That's why I'm asking, is this one day?
No, I think that's,
no, that's still the 2 days.
Right, so then I don't think that the first day we have to put time limits on it. I think you look where you are in day one, and then you say, hey, let's manage our time the second day so that we're not.
Or maybe at lunch we can take that.
But
At
at
least
least
build in breaks.
we make sure that,
I don't think we should stop the work because we set an artificial time, right?
right, yeah, can we make sure that the future meeting day conversations aren't October 2nd go?
Oh,
Because that's something I'm gonna need
I
to
didn't
take.
know what you said.
The future meeting, a timeline of our, how long we anticipate this taking. Because that's something that I know I'm going to need to take back, and I'm not going to be able to be here October 3rd, so.
Okey dokey, so everybody's okay with this? Consensus?
Do we want to put down, I guess we are, the next steps before we come? Would be, what do we all agree upon what we do before we come?
make sure we read
Are you familiar with this?
those documents.
So our next steps would be that we have read those documents and not scribbled, right, have taken notes so that we're not trying to arbitrarily put the document in the time of that evening.
All right, I guess so we're reviewing these documents, and I thought our discussion was purposeful and positive today, but
Because we're afraid from the principal.
are we, I didn't hear any part of our conversation being, okay, so I like that standard. That's something we definitely want to include in our recommendation.
Yeah, I heard that.
We did? Okay, then we're keeping track of that.
And then we need to add circle graphs somewhere.
Yeah.
because we-
Yes, so
We kept track of what checklist we would approve.
This is the, and you have a transcript, right? That you're working.
Okay.
It's right here. Video, keep going back to that.
Well, and I think that we kind of go quickly, but Bob really liked the statistics, we need circle graphs. I think we all like the statistics, we need circle graphs, there needs some tweaks on different things that.
And some wording changes and that kind of stuff, yes.
And
And then we'll see what we bring in from the other ones as well, see what, have we missed anything? That
We
wasn't
don't want
really
to
made
miss
it.
exactly. Absolutely.
Well, I'm gonna make a motion. I think that Margaret, because of her background in education and her ability to talk to groups, I mean, that's what she does, you know, and I think her certification spreads across our entire grade span that we're supposed to do. That I think she'd make a great head liaison or whatever we call that person. Yes, and that's sort of, I think that she would make a great one. That's not in, you don't have to write every word that one.
So you know, the, one of the.
Yes, I would move that she be one of the leaders.
Second.
Discussion.
Margaret, how do you feel about it?
I will do the very best I can. I am K-12 certified. I am also teaching a graduate class for elementary math teachers. So I feel comfortable knowing mathematics, K-12 plus. I have been in leadership roles before. I have addressed groups before. I don't know that we specifically know the task at hand. I'll charge in and
Will this person be one of the ones that has to go to the public hearings?
we'll be the ones giving our report from this work group, right? So I'm assuming that's what we're here.
and I would anticipate that's also state board.
I think that you make your report to the state board, and they're the ones holding this correct hearings, is my understanding, but remember, I think so.
I'm more than comfortable with Margaret doing that. But I would also say that, if we have two, and I think there should be some balance, for example, if we have a person in this role, then perhaps the other person needs to be this role. And, I feel strongly that, one of our spokespeople should be a classroom teacher. So I would, nominate Tiffany, and
Well, we need to act on this motion first.
Yes, but I think, at least for me, my decision on that motion would be.
So you want me to accept an amendment?
Well, what I'm trying to say is, and I'm not probably not being as official as I'm supposed to be, but, it's difficult for me to vote on one person because that may limit who the other person is. Does that make sense?
And if I have to be honest with you, I was going to nominate two people, and I thought, well, people may want to just do one at a time. So if you want me to accept Tiffany as a second, I will second liaison, I'll certainly do
I'd
that.
rather just vote it one at a time. Because otherwise, if you don't want one of the people, you voting against two of them. I mean,
That's why
Well,
I originally.
one consideration, I think, I haven't, I don't know Margaret, but her experience sounds like it covers all the bases, but it sounds like you may spend most of your days with elementary teachers?
No, ma'am.
Okay,
It's K-12.
and you do
And-
TV for everybody, or you do
I'm
presentation?
I'm in and out of school districts. Some days it's consult, some days it's PD. I also work, I'm on staff adjunct faculty at Northwest Missouri State University, teaching graduate courses in the math.
Are the graduate courses for what topics are
It's the new elementary math certification program, the 2-year cohort that's being.
Well, I'm just suggesting that we might want to balance it with, maybe Fred, on the other end of the spectrum, he's a classroom teacher, and, that's just my general thought.
Fred, where do you teach?
I teach K-to-V Academy.
And are you teaching math or are you teaching science?
I'm teaching math and science and English and writing.
Okay, so you teach multiple
High school.
High school.
Yes, it is high school, also, we start at 7th grade, that's, this includes 7th as well.
They did give us this yesterday that says, talking about the work group appointees and liaisons, it says that their duties will include creating monthly reports for the legislature and state board of education using the official notes from the note-taker recorder, attend HB 1490 mandated public hearing meetings as necessary to report on the progress, and attend state board of education and board legislative meetings as necessary to report on the progress. So there's.
So, and with the most respect to Fred, I want the liaison over there.
Yeah,
But he's already there. But if it's a hardship to get here to the meetings, then having to regularly report,
That's additional time.
Well, I don't accept it as the assistant. Yes, I think there's a primary and there's a secondary, right?
I would say that I think it's important to have a public school teacher, because that's going to be mandated to teach these standards. And I don't like this, but in the trenches,
right?
I mean, because there is.
Yeah, I didn't think about that.
And,
Well, I
and
mean,
so, I mean, so, do you want me to move forward with my motion here? We've got one on the floor.
We can put on the board just for.
Call the question.
Motion. Okay,
Yeah.
follow the question? Okay, all those in favor of Margaret being a liaison, please raise your hand. Yes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Opposed? Abstain?
What else are you going on?
All right, then I nominate 15.
One second.
Oh, I'm sorry, I don't know.
One second. Did what was right?
I misunderstood. I voted in favor
Of Margaret.
Margaret.
So you want to change your vote?
Oh, yes.
Abstention.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I misunderstood. I thought we were doing the group thing.
Oh, okay.
Now we good. Discussion. All those in favor of Tiffany, please signify by raising your hands. Oh, sorry, Tiffany. You can vote too, too.
She's deciding she wants to come or not go to school.
I was thinking that in my
Yeah,
head.
because you're gonna have to miss school class.
Yes.
It's not an easy thing.
Got it? Opposed? And abstain.
That's 10 years, that's 7%.
Okay. So those are our liaisons.
And I guess that, hey, you know what? It's only 2 minutes after 2:30.
Next time.
Yeah, I think we got a lot done this afternoon. Everybody got really focused and got in on task and did a really good job. And the afternoon.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's better.
And did you stop the big sandwich from Walmart? Sorry, I can't do it. I pulled it in the other meetings. Yeah, I understand how that goes. So we just did. Yeah, you know, I figured you guys would have to leave that other than, but we just shoot. So, so I guess, are we done?
9 o'clock in the Jefferson Building on
The sixth
Thursday.
Second.
The second.
Yes, it's on the
Did
sixth.
Margaret, did you get it?
So I haven't.
But you know,
Yeah, I know sometimes you have to remind.
And everybody has a copy of what they need, or Lisa, did she email that stuff to you?
I think it's on the Dropbox and I'm gonna work on that.
Okay, and the next time we're here next week, and you have to just come back and sit down. So glad that it's not hard.
Is it next week?
It's next Thursday, Friday. At the end of the month. Yeah, so the very end. And so Fred, do you think you're gonna be able to hear?
I don't know.
I hope you are. Well, but, you know, if you can get your comments, at least type them and send them. So if you're not here, because we'd like to have your input, so what you can type those up. Did you communicate it up in the Dropbox? No, you don't. I'm emailing.
everything to Fred.
Okay, Fred's gonna get everybody.